And I got there before them because we walked over from Gardner Park. But I had my truck because I had to bring stuff over. So I just drove over and I met them. And so I'm talking with the dude at the Glory House, and all of a sudden I see this ambulance pull up, and all of the kids start hopping out the ambulance, and I'm like, all right, welcome to Together Talks. We're your hosts. My name's Hagen Harrison.
I'm Joshua Pugh.
And alongside us today, we have the Bradley Smith.
What's up, guys? Glad to be here with you boys.
Yeah, we're glad to have you. Thank you.
So
Shout out to you.
Shout out to Brad.
We'll get to that.
Shout out to Brad.
Yeah, pretty much this is just a podcast based on Together Conference now. You know, it's not really Together Weekend. We've kind of grown deeper than that now. Really just want to take some time and sit down with other student ministry leaders in our community and in our city, and really just kind of want to have opportunities we can just kind of talk with them and see their visions and their dreams that they have for their ministry and their stories, and really just how we can all work collectively together on how we can further enhance and advance the kingdom and continuing to disciple these students. And really, I guess it's the big part of it is how we can all do that together and not separate. So
Yeah, absolutely. Excited to have local student pastors, local pastors, and then even like just leaders in our community. People who may not be necessarily serving a position in a church, but maybe like principals and mayors and city officials. And I'm trying to get the sheriff in here to tell me everything wrong that you've ever done in your life.
Man, that'd be some deep stuff.
But yeah, just trying to bring people together in a world that's so torn apart and so at each other's throat, just trying to see what we can do as a couple of different people just to bring Jones County at least together and united.
That's good. Before we kind of get into it, we kind of shouted Brad out at the beginning, but do want to shout him out again because this whole thing wouldn't be possible without him. So honestly,
Absolutely.
Thank you, Brad, for getting all this set up. I mean, this cool setup that we have is really.
It's my pleasure. It was your vision, so you guys really deserve all the credit. So I mean,
Nah, man.
No, man.
this is your
Shout
deal,
out to Brad.
your setup. I love the what you got going on in here. So shout out to you boys.
Shout out to
man.
Brad.
Shout out to everybody.
Yeah. Shout out to God.
As we kind of get going, though, I do want to. This first episode, we're obviously going to have more guests on. And we've already got our guests for the next episode lined up.
Very excited about.
Absolutely.
That's right.
Excited about.
Absolutely.
And so really just wanted to take this first episode and just kind of have you, Josh. Obviously, we're both going to be co-hosts moving forward, but for this one, I kind of wanted to play the role of host, and then you play the role of guest, because really Together was your vision. And so I kind of want to just ask you some questions about it. You know, what exactly is it? You know, vision, you know, what to expect, all that. So first question, really, what is Together? Like, if I was a stranger and didn't have any idea what it was, like, what would you say?
Yeah, so just to give a little bit of background and not to open up like a whole can of worms, but I was at a very small little church in Laurel, Mississippi until I was 14 years old, and ended up leaving the church because the church pretty much had an unofficial split because the church was not united, not agreeing on the same issues, and not willing to compromise on anything. And so I thought after we had ended up leaving that church, that was just a one church deal. But as I started to realize here in Jones County and in many churches across the United States and in many churches in America, there's several churches who are split and torn down the middle and are not willing to come to agreements on anything, not willing to compromise, not willing to admit that, hey, we're all still brothers and sisters in Christ. Yeah. And so the vision of Together kind of came to, you know, we have these students who all go to the same schools. They go to the same football games, same pep rallies, same basketball games, same functions, all together. But they don't do church together. You know, they all go to their separate churches. They all believe the same thing. They're all worshiping the same God, all contending and believing for great things in this community, but they're all doing it separate.
Yeah.
And so it's this wild thing that I said, what if we had a weekend where we had student ministries and student pastors from different churches come in and we just praise God together. We just worship together. That way, when we see each other in the hallways again, it's not these strangers that just walk the same halls as us and go to the same events as us, but that's our brother and our sister in Christ that we can come together and start to have real impact outside of our churches, outside of our classroom, outside of our hallways, because there's still a lost and a hurting world out there. And how can a divided church heal a divided world? It's just coming together to bridge that gap and just bring unity in the thing that matters the most, and it's God's church, his people.
I do love about how, like, when we got together, I guess around this time last year, you kind of pitched the idea, and the main centralized point is, there are three aspects of it. It's like we want students to connect and grow deeper with Jesus. Obviously, that's the first one.
Yeah.
We want them to connect and grow closer to each other within their own student ministries.
Yeah.
And then we also want them to connect and grow, develop friendships and relationships with other believers in other student ministries.
Yeah.
Regardless of the denomination.
Right.
And so I think that's a big thing that's one of the biggest reasons why I jumped on board, is because I don't like the denominational lines. I think there's just a lot of division there. And if we can kind of get past that and just say we all believe and love Jesus, so can we agree on that? And then, like, let's develop relationships and friendships and just advance the kingdom. I love the idea of together and what it is. And so, honestly, shout out to you for kind of bringing that vision to fruition.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those deals where I grew up Southern Baptist, heavily influenced by the Southern Baptist Church. Shout out to the Southern Baptist Church. A lot of the man of God that I am today is influenced by the Southern Baptist Church. Yeah. And when I was in the church, I thought that, like, there was no other way that was correct. Now, that's not a Southern Baptist way of thinking. That's just a dumb 13, 14-year-old's way of thinking. But I was like, Southern Baptists are right. Nobody else is right. We're the only ones that are going to be in heaven, which is totally not true. But that's how I thought. And it had nothing to do with the Southern Baptist Church. It's just how I thought. And then when that church split and I ended up here at Agape and working with Pastor James and working with the wonderful people here, I started to realize, like, there's so many different denominations, and I want you to take it from here, because you've got Pastor Johnny Buckner from New Horizons in Starkville, who said, you just got to take it, because I'm going to butcher it.
Pretty much, I grew up, I didn't get saved until I was 17, didn't go to church, and when I did, it was Baptist church. When I got saved, it was a Pentecostal church. Then I moved to college, and I went to Highlands, which is non-denom, and now I'm at Agape, which is non-denom. Went to New Horizons in Starkville, which is, kind of Pentecostal, non-denom. And so I've been a part of multiple different denominations that everyone kind of operates and works differently, but they all have the same mindset of, like, Jesus is why we do this, right? Mm-hmm. And so we may believe a couple other things differently. And Pastor Johnny says something that's really stood out to me in the past few years, but he had a similar conversation with a guy who went to a different denominational church, and they couldn't really agree on some of the, like, theological and deep spiritual stuff. And Pastor Johnny was just like, okay, if we're being honest, none of us have it 100% right.
That's true.
We really don't. Like, none of us.
We don't have a clue.
No, none of us have it completely 100% right. So knowing that, can we just find some common ground and just respect each other and say, we both love Jesus. We may not have the same theological beliefs. We may not have the same doctrine. We may not have the same this or that, but we both still love Jesus.
Yeah. And
so can we just agree on that and then work from there on how to go out and effectively minister to the world together?
Yeah.
And so, because I don't know, he said that, and I've been a part of different denominations, and again, they all work differently, and they have different specific beliefs on little things, but I think sometimes we get so caught up in the little things.
Yeah.
And it's just like, can we just stay focused on Jesus and, like, go out and reach the world for him and not necessarily for a specific church or a specific goal?
If I could interject real quick here, not to take too much time, and we may go over, but growing up as a pastor's kid in a certain denomination that was Congregational Methodist, and a lot of people don't even, they're like, a what, you know? And so smaller denomination, but utmost respect and love for that denomination, the people. But what I was getting at is that, you know, my dad and like most other, you know, pastors that I know, it's never a conversation starter or topic for like, you know, outreach or witness to like, oh, by the way, I'm, you know, heavily involved in this denomination and you should be too.
Yeah.
Right.
It's always more about, hey, let me tell you about the love of Jesus. Nowhere in there is it like, you know, you should join the Southern Baptist denomination or
right,
you know, anything like that. So I think you boys are hitting it right on the head. You know, it's there are denominations, we know that, and especially in the South, that's kind of a big deal. But you know, being the church is so much more than the four walls and the name outside. So just had a great time being involved last year. Look forward to it this year, and hopefully see a lot of lives change. So
absolutely.
For sure. Yeah. And just to kind of go off that real quick, I just think back to our mission trip this past summer to Greece. You know, you were there, Josh, and one thing, like, we go out and do our street evangelism, and we never would go up to people after our drama to talk with them. We never went up to them and was like, let me tell you about Agape Church. Now, every person we talked to is like, you know, what did you see? What did you think? This is what it meant. Let me tell you about Jesus.
Yeah.
So, like, that's the common ground that we all have with every other church out there who worships Jesus and serves him as God and Lord and Savior. And so I wish we could just get back to the fundamentals of that. And I think if we can successfully do that, then we'll successfully be able to do, I mean, whatever he calls us to.
And I think that, you know, other churches will then be able to be successful as well.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of like a trickle effect. It's not a selfish thing that you guys are wanting to, you know, promote. Like, I think the benefit will be, you know, throughout all the churches. That are involved. So
and that's another thing is when we started this, it was never meant to be an agape thing.
No,
like, we're totally all for other churches and other student ministry leaders coming and taking part.
I love that.
And we're going to get into that a little bit more later, but
maybe next week.
Before we kind of get on that, though, I do want to ask, and you kind of explained a little bit of this in the last question, but just the vision, the overall vision of Together, like, where did that come from? Where did that stem from? Or maybe you said, you know, you grew up in church and this is the things you noticed and this is what you want to do about it. But where did you get the idea of, like, we need to have a Together weekend? These are the attributes that we need to have regarding that weekend. These are the things we want to accomplish. Like, where did all that come from?
Yeah. So I think a main thing is, you know, first and foremost, before I say anything about any other churches, and this absolutely will not be a podcast where we bash or talk bad about other churches, and that never will be a thing that you'll see on this podcast.
Right.
If we talk bad about a church, it might be our own, but it will not be. We have great people here. No, so, you know, we believe that the local church is the hope of the world. And we see the world around us that is so divided, especially this is coming mainly out of the year that we all had in 2020. And if I have to tell you how much of a crazy year 2020 was, then you're living under a rock. But no, when people were so divided on Republican and Democrat, conservative and liberal, Joe Biden, Donald Trump, mask, no mask, vaccine, no vaccine, Black Lives Matter, all lives matter.
So much division.
Pro-life, pro-choice, just everywhere in the world. And so you say, where in the world can we find Jesus in this? Well, let's look to the local church. And you look to the local church, which we believe is the hope of the world. And they were just as divided as the world around us. And I'm like, guys, this is ridiculous. How in the world can we expect people to come to Jesus to escape the turmoil and the brokenness of the world around them when the church is doing the exact same thing and attacking the same people in the same way and splitting right down the line? If you come to this church, you better be Republican, you better be anti-mask, pro-life. And it's one of these deals where it's like, we all are different people. We all live different lives. We all vote different ways. But it's coming back to the same thing, and it's the true thing is always the true thing. Jesus is the light of the world. He's the one who changes hearts. He's the one who changes everyone who comes to him. And so there's things in church that are totally worth talking about. The things in this world that divide us are not one of them, and they should never be the deciding factor in a church and in a congregation of people.
Yeah.
And so it just kind of got to this point where I said, you know what? We're never going to be able to change the people who don't know Jesus unless we fix our problems in-house first.
Yeah.
So the idea came, if we can get people together to come together and put their differences aside, and there still will be differences. Mm-hmm. That's one thing. It's not like we came together and we're like, all right, guys, let's debate it out. Let's talk out the real issues. We're not doing that. The main thing will always be the main thing. It's Jesus, lifting him high, seeing a world changed, but understanding that that's the thing that we can all agree on. That's the thing that we'll all lay our shields down on, is that Jesus is the light of the world. He will change everything, but we need to put our pride aside and just come together to realize that.
Yeah. One thing that's kind of been, I've kind of been just, I guess, soaking in the last really year since we did this. It's just thinking about all the division that we had back in 2020, like you talked about. And just the mindset of like a divided church is never going to reach a divided world. You know, we've got to be united because we're one body. Yeah. We actually just talked about that in student ministry. Is like, my body won't function unless I have everything it needs to function. Like, if I don't have arms, I'm never going to be able to grab stuff. If I don't have a mouth, I can't eat. It's like, even if we have different denominations, we all still have different gifts and talents and abilities that God has put in us to serve his purpose. And we got to work together to use those and to go out and reach the lost, because there are some gifts I have that would work in trying to reach out to people that you may not have or may not work for you, and then vice versa. And so I just think it's important to be united, and I love that that's kind of the mindset of Together. It's all about unity and community.
Yeah, unity and community. I like
that. We're going to have that on some wristbands for conference.
That was good.
That was off the dome. But
off the dome. Freestyling now.
I do want to talk about we've mentioned different denominations. Cade Pierce. Our
boy. Shout out to Cade Pierce.
Cade is the man. He has absolutely been a catalyst for really getting this thing started and getting it going. And he doesn't go to Agape.
No.
He doesn't go to a non-denominational church. He's a part of Mount Vernon, and we're looking forward to having him on. But, man, I remember when we met with him, I had never talked to him. Well, that's a lie. I had to, reach out and text him and ask for a meeting. But I'd
never met face to face.
I didn't know who he was. Yeah, I didn't know much about him.
Yeah.
And, I mean, within minutes of our meeting with him, he was, all on board.
Oh, yeah.
Because he saw the need for it in our community. He saw the vision behind it, and he knew it was important. And I don't know. That was huge. Cade's been a huge part of that, so I'm looking forward to having him on. But just kind of talking about Cade, because this kind of leads into my next question. Mm-hmm. What were your biggest takeaways from last year? It was Together Weekend.
Together Weekend.
Yeah.
Together
so what were your
Weekend.
biggest takeaways from it last year?
I think the main thing that I remember, the image I still see in my head every time, is that Saturday night session where Pastor Wes Gardner from the Springs Church, shout out Pastor Wes, gave an incredible message, just kind of telling students, you've got to grow in community with your Lord and Savior, your Creator, Jesus Christ. And it was this moment where we opened up the altar, and, that's not something that we typically do at Agape. We've started leaning more towards that. But it's not something we've done a lot of. And we just opened the altar and said, if you've got anything that you want to lift up to God, anything that you're just ready to lay down, just meet up here. And we had two main churches involved. It was Agape's student ministry and Mount Vernon's student ministry, the Light Room. Mm-hmm. And what I saw, and it was so incredible, and it was students all rushing the altar. When they got up there, they didn't divide. Agape goes here, Mount Vernon goes here. Yeah. We stay separated, and I'll watch my back to make sure that you're not trying to do anything to me. Mm-hmm. No, when our students got up there, it's kids who have never met each other, do not know each other, and as far as I know, do not go to the same schools. We have a lot of West Jones, Laurel Christian, South Jones kids. He has a lot of homeschool. He has a lot of Northeast Jones kids, some South Jones. And when they got up there, it didn't matter which student ministry they were with. It didn't matter what school they went to, but they all started grouping up like Agape and Mount Vernon and just started praying with each other and contending for each other and believing these great things for each other. And I just stood in the back, and all I wanted for the weekend was for us to meet each other, make connections, and then go out after that. But in that moment, even the students that we had gathered said, nah, we're not waiting until we leave. Like right here, right now, before Jesus and before the church, we're committing that we're building the unity. We didn't even call for that. We weren't like, get down there and you Agape kids meet with Mount Vernon. It was just one of those deals where they sensed the Spirit bonding them together and sense the unity that they had, and just such a beautiful moment, and just a spitting image of heaven, what heaven's going to look like.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say to that, it was really great to see, students have that sensitivity to the Spirit. You know what I mean? I remember growing up and attending church camp and all this with tons of kids you didn't know, and but when you get that, the feeling, and you take that step to leave your seat, and like we had last year, an altar full of students. Yeah. For them to make that, initial step, I think, a lot of adults, myself included, we're almost like insensitive to that feeling. And just to see the students like, no hesitation, I'm stepping out. And the beautiful thing about that is, if there is that little bit of nervousness or whatever to make that step, that first initial moment, God will meet you right there, and this be like the best thing. So it's really awesome to see, like you said. So
for sure.
And I think what's crazy about that is, we had this moment set up, and I don't want to say moment, but we had just knew, at the end of this thing, we want to open the altar up. We want to have a moment for students to kind of connect, just mainly to connect with God. Which was still the most important thing. They kind of sensed the spirit of unity kind of stirring in them, and they took it over. And to the point where we expected this to be like maybe a 5-10 minute thing.
Well, Dunsky. No.
It kind of ended up just being their thing.
Oh, no. We were like, all right, so we got about 10-15 minutes of conference together weekend left. We'll give them about 10 minutes. And I think we're there for probably another 45, maybe an hour.
I'll take your 10 and
I'll raise you 30.
Oh my gosh. They say, excuse us, we got bigger things to worry about. And even in that, us understanding that this is no longer about us.
Yeah.
Those students are now taking hold of this and grabbing it by the reins and just saying, God, whatever you have for us this weekend, we're going there and we'll go further.
Yeah.
Just insane.
I think for me, the biggest takeaway, I have two. One, obviously, we had a couple students that accepted Christ in their life.
Yes.
So that was huge. And it was actually a couple of Cade's students. So we'll dive further into that when we have him on. But that was, that's the end goal. Like we want people to come to Jesus. So that was huge. I think another one, and that's like obviously first, but this one is so close. I love how throughout the weekend we had things set up where they could actually build relationships. It wasn't like, come to these 3 worship sessions, and then in between, kind of do your own thing, whatever. Like we had the worship session, we added time for small groups, we had all of our meals were together in the same area. We had recreation time where we just like literally randomly split them up into separate random teams, and they had to build friendships and relationships to make that work. We had serve opportunities throughout the city at random. Like it's not like we were like Agape Church kids go here, Mount Vernon kids go there. Like it was all completely random, and the main point of that is to get them to like interact with each other and build relationships with each other. And my takeaway from that is like looking back on the weekend, we've done stuff with Mount Vernon since then. We've had community groups. We've had us at ASM at Agape. We don't have services in the summer because we kind of take the summer off for mission trips, downtown Thursday, whatever. But Cade and Mount Vernon, they invited us to come to one of their services, and we did. And I remember walking into the light room, and like most of our kids were already there interacting and hanging out with our kids. You would never guess that it was awesome. Like different, like 2 student ministries there. You'd have thought, man, this is just one big student ministry. And I think looking back at that, that's what it's about.
Yeah.
The heart and the vision behind it is we want them to get closer to God, but we want them to get closer to each other.
Yeah.
And just seeing like we're more than just our church. We're more than just Agape. They're more than just Mount Vernon. Like we're the united body. And I just think it was so cool to walk in and just see like our students just playing Foursquare and playing ping pong with their students. Like,
Yeah.
they never skipped a beat either.
Yeah.
And so I think for it to have been so successful last year in that aspect, I think it can only get better from there, and get bigger and deeper. And so I'm looking forward to it, but I love that, because growing up, that's not something we had.
No.
So
And it creates a moment for the outside world to look in and be like, weren't y'all just fighting like a year ago with each other about like all these issues that the rest of the world is fighting about?
Yeah.
And I think it takes like even our own students to say, we're over that. We got bigger things. We're united for bigger goals, and we've got a bigger vision in mind than division in the church.
yeah.
I about whooped 2 of K's kids during a serve opportunity. I was like, I feel like we're all united because I'm about to whoop these kids
Yeah.
right here. Shout out to Hunter and
Dude.
Dylan for acting absolute fools in the remnant for our service project.
I
Those
remember
kids.
we went to I was at the Glory House alongside Josh Elsie and some of his crew from the Springs.
Shout out to the Springs.
And I got there before them because we walked over from Gardner Park. But I had my truck because I had to bring stuff over. So I just drove over and I met them. And so I'm talking with the dude at the Glory House, and all of a sudden I see this ambulance pull up, and all of the kids start hopping out the ambulance. And I'm like, what is happening? I didn't know, but Josh was like over this district or something like that. Something with his job. He had connection with the dude who had an ambulance. And so he got that instead of walking all the way from Gardner. But yeah, I was like, I see all these kids hopping out the ambulance. I'm
Hopping
like,
out of an ambulance.
what is
That
happening?
is a student minister's worst nightmare.
Oh, no, it totally is.
Oh, I can't wait to talk to these mamas.
Showing pictures of their children hopping out of an ambulance.
Exactly.
Yeah, so a little backstory to that. I had set up the service projects for the afternoon, and Grant Staples, that's right. Shout out to Grant Staples and Glory House. I had talked to him earlier in the week, and he told me we're going to it's a different...
The Bread of Life.
Bread of
Life.
Bread of Life Center. Yeah. And so we had... he had told me that's where it was, and I knew that that's like a good little ways away and definitely not a walk.
Yeah.
And then literally, like, Hagen's like, all right, we're walking to the Glory House. And I was like, oh, by
Because
the
the
way,
Glory House is just right across the street.
we were
Right,
at Gardner
right.
Where we
Park.
were at.
The Glory House is literally like half a football field
Yeah.
away.
But the Bread of
The
Life
Bread
Center.
of Life Center is like a good, like,
Well, when
couple
you're walking
blocks.
in the summertime, it's like 20 miles.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it's like a 5-minute drive away.
Yeah, it's
like
not-
it's not a close walk.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, Hagen, what are we gonna do? And then Josh whips up. He's like, I got an ambulance. And we're
Yeah.
like, heck yeah, you do. And so we piled them
So
kids in the
random.
ambulance.
Yeah, the things that happen at Together Conference now. But
Together conference.
I do kind of want to hit on just this important thought that I kind of got in some personal prayer time last week. You know, we talk about Together can only get better. It can only get deeper and bigger. I do want to talk it's not about numbers for me. I think for a little while, I think you have that humanistic mindset of like, man, I want to pack City Center out.
Yeah.
Like I want to pack it to the brim.
Mm-hmm.
And I was kind of having some prayer time about 2 weeks ago, and I really felt like the Holy Spirit just smacked me around. It was like, numbers aren't going to do anything. We may grow in numbers, we may pack the place out, but if none of them have an encounter with God, then none of it matters anyways.
That's right.
And so I think, like, obviously we want to see it grow, and I believe that it will, but I think it's important to stay focused on, like, I want it to grow with the power of God.
Yeah.
Like, I'd rather have 40 or 50 students come, having an absolutely incredible encounter and be able to take that out into their city and then let it grow from there, as opposed to just being like hosting this really cool event where we kind of just babysit kids for, and not a day and a half. And I don't know. I want it to grow, but I want it to grow in power. And I don't want people to watch this or listen to this think we're just all about numbers and, so.
And I think when we first started talking about the vision of Together, and it's one of those deals where we're like, in order for Jones County to change, we need multiple churches there. We need multiple people to be there to see this vision come through. And so there is like the humanistic side of it. It's like, well, we need 300 on the first year of it. We need 500 on the second year of it. But it's one of those deals where it's like 500 lukewarm kids don't compare anything to 30 or 50 kids who are absolutely sold out on fire. And I don't want to miss any opportunity to disciple and shepherd a smaller crowd just so we can get a bigger one.
Yeah, I agree. So we're kind of running low on time here. Kind of want to keep this short, but I do have one last question, and it's something that you can kind of answer and you kind of can't because we don't want to give anything away. But we got Together Conference coming up in a couple months. What's the vision for the future? Like, what are some things we can expect moving forward? All that. You got any?
Woo. Yeah.
Any spoilers you can share?
I don't want to spoil anything. First of all, we've got incredible friends from around Mississippi that are going to be joining us.
Yep.
For sure, shout out to New Horizons, going to be back with us.
Yep.
Got some of our friends from Together Weekend last year coming to Together Conference this year.
Yeah.
That we're super excited about. And then some new friends that you guys will get to meet. But kind of the vision behind Together Conference this year is better together.
Yeah.
We're better together. And kind of spinning off of we can do better. And
right.
I think originally we thought we can do a better conference, but I think it's like we can do better with what?
Just overall.
Oh yeah, just providing room for the Holy Spirit to move, providing opportunities for God to speak clearly to students. We can do better, and just being more intentional. That's a word that our church is using this year, is being intentional. Just being intentional with the moments we have and the students we have. And I know we're running out of time. We may run over a minute or two, but just being better, just building better, creating better, and just giving God our absolute best and then beyond. So
yeah.
What's
your
your thoughts?
Just kind of I agree. Going off of that, talking about just being better. Last year we ended the conference with a pretty big announcement of the community groups that we've kind of been doing ever since. Because the vision of this, which it may have started out like this, but I think God moved and it didn't end like that. We don't want this to be something like come to Together Conference for 2 days out of a year and then like we'll see you next year.
Yeah.
So we implemented the community group so that every few months we have something that we can kind of come back together on, continue to develop those friendships, continue to develop those relationships, because, really, you can't have a good friendship or relationship if you never spend time with anybody.
That's right.
So if we never offer opportunities for these kids to grow with each other, then
they won't.
Essentially, they won't. And essentially it just becomes just a conference. And I remember you saying last year, like, Together's not a conference, it's a movement. And so I think like it's important to continue to establish and give these kids opportunities to grow. So we had that announcement at the end of the conference last year. We do have another big announcement at the end of the conference this year.
Huge.
So
you're not ready.
Huge.
Make sure you're there. It's going to be really neat. And then, honestly, just a kind of a spoiler, we already have our big announcement for conference next year as well. So, we
got big announcements for the next 2 years.
Yeah.
Unless.
But it all stems from wanting you guys to have opportunities. I want students to have opportunities to grow in relationships and do cool things with each other and glorify God.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of it. That's all the time that we really have for this episode. I think it was pretty solid one, pretty good
Brother
one.
man.
Yeah,
Once again, shout out to Brad.
Shout out to Brad.
This podcast will be available on our YouTube page as well as our Spotify account. So make sure you follow each one of those. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening in. I'm looking forward to next week's episode with our very special guest. I don't know if we should announce it now or maybe just keep it a secret.
We'll keep it a secret.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
let's just say this. We've said so much already. If you can't guess who's going to be here next week, you didn't listen to the podcast.
Yeah.
So
we'll just give you something to chew on for the next month or so.
So be sure you listen to it all the way and maybe
That's right.
figure it out.
For sure. These will be available the first week of every month. So looking forward to doing more.
Absolutely.
I enjoyed this. And I guess with that, we are out.
Shout out to Brad.
Shout out to Brad. See you guys.